Here are my key insights from the out of position reg against in position player reg caller on the button, single raised pot. The ranges that we've used are as follows. Out of position player is using a 17% MP opening range. And this is in position player's button calling range. We've assumed 100 big blind stacks, and we've given quite a few sizings for both positions, and we are using a online reg structure. Firstly, for the global insights. A couple of interesting things is that in position players' EV as a percentage of pot deviates quite a lot depending on the board. In position player is so devoid of ace X, king X, queen X that its EV can be as low as 40% and even below that for about 1/3 of the boards. This is quite in contrast to, let's say, a 3-bet pot in which the pre-flop defender, even though he would be at an EV disadvantage on these Broadway boards, is not at such a disadvantage on so many boards. In this way, this spot is unique. This is because, of course, the out of position player has far more ace X and king X than the in position player. The other thing we looked at notably was the out of position player's bet frequency in equilibrium. Very interestingly, on these Broadway boards that favor the out of position player, a couple of examples here. So mostly double Broadways. The out of position player has a very high bet frequency in equilibrium. On some of these paired boards and ace high boards, queen high boards, the out of position player still has a modest bet frequency. The average out of position player bet frequency is 33%. The other thing to note, the pot size on the flop was 6. Notice the frequency at which the out of position player uses the 1.5x pot overbet. It is almost non-existent. Similarly, the 2/3 bet size is quite rarely used, averaging less than 10%. In fact, the out of position player, when it does like to bet, tends to use the smaller 1/3 sizing. So as a matter of strategy construction, we can eliminate the larger 2 sizings totally from the strategy of the out of position player. I have also done a few node-locked sims in which the out of position player must bet 1/3 with range. This column shows the percentage of EV lost by the out of position player when betting range for 1/3 as compared to equilibrium. Notice how on a lot of boards it actually gains more EV from betting 1/3 with range. And even on the boards in which it loses EV by betting with range, it only loses around 1 to 2%. This is quite low. If we compare this to a button against big blind single raised pot, in which the in-position player is betting with range for a 1/3 size, often you'd lose somewhere around 3 to 4% on some of the worst boards, whereas here you're losing only less than 2% on some of the worst boards. The reason we lose EV on boards which are unfavorable to the OOP player is because the IP player is allowed to float OOP at a high frequency. I've taken as an example 10-5-6 Rainbow, which is the worst board for the out of position player in terms of equity. It's also one of the worst in terms of EV. Let's start with the equilibrium scenario. Out of position player is meant to check nearly entirety of range. If he does bet using the smaller sizing, in position can start raising at 16%, and it also can start to call at around 77%, which is much more than the minimum defense frequency for against a 1/3 pot size bet. So what this is saying is that if out of position is betting for 1/3, this allows in position to float quite a lot. If we look at the node-locked sim in which out of position is forced to bet 1/3, in position player is doing a huge amount of floating and raising. It floats at pretty much 100% of its range, and it raises about 1/3 of its continuing range at around a 35% frequency, which is very, very high. Starting with overpairs, top pairs, double backdoors, sets. Actually, I should have said that first, because that comprises most of the EV of IP's range. One thing to note is that the boards which favor the in-position player are boards in which the in-position player has a nut advantage. As you can see here, the red line is significantly above the green line over the top part of the distribution, indicating that IP has far more sets than OOP. Doesn't show it too clearly here. But basically, IP has 5s and 6s at full frequency, whereas OOP doesn't. And the implication of this is that if IP raises OOP's bet on the flop, OOP cannot re-raise as a 3-bet that much, only at 7%. Therefore allowing IP to realize its equity quite well, because its nut advantage is protecting its flop raising range against the c-bet. But interestingly, I do not think any population is raising enough here. So even at equilibrium, you only lose 1.4% by betting with range as the out of position player on one of the worst boards for you. And given that I don't think anyone uses this IP strategy, raising this much, I think it's reasonable to say that OOP can bet with range on every board for 1/3 sizing in this spot. To sum up, my strategy on this board will be as follows. I will be betting 1/3 with range on about 2/3 of these boards, pretty much roughly these boards. Basically, double Broadway, paired boards, high, low, low disconnected, ace high, king high, queen high. These kinds of boards, I will be betting 1/3 out of position. It is hardly exploitable in equilibrium, let alone by population. And I think exploitatively it has quite a lot of merit, because I think population is overfolding. On some of these worst boards for the out of position player, I will employ a range check strategy. On no board will I ever break up my range on the flop, so I will either be range checking or range betting for reasons of not splitting the game tree.